Okay. So, round four. A quick reintroduction of what this puzzle is all about. You've got, uh, what is this? Nitric oxide, nitrogen, and oxygen in equal amounts. You've got reactors, and you just gotta make it all into nitric oxide. Now, the requirements are yes, this thing must run forever, which I've tested with everyone's solution up to 4,000 inputs, which, yes, is very far away from forever, but it's close enough for practical purposes, I'd say. Now, the gimmick of this puzzle is your reactors are uh, they've got walls everywhere. You can only move things left or right. You can't move things up or down, or otherwise you will crash into these walls. But you do have quantum tunnels that you can use to swap into other lanes of the reactor. Yeah. Now, the sensor reactor gives you two sensors, and you'll have two quantum tunnels. The superbonder reactor means you won't have any sensors, but you get two more tunnels. So you get more lanes of access. So there's some interesting things going on here, because not only do you have more lanes of access, but there's also ways of playing with how you connect these reactors to get access to additional lanes. So reminder that the puzzle is mostly about reactor optimization. So you're trying to get this to as few reactor count as you possibly can. Yeah, so if I just had one reactor, this is a valid reactor setup, in which case I really only have two lanes here because I've got an atom in each of these on the second and third row. And if I swap them out, I have access to three more lanes. But I could also, instead of passing this directly this way, I could feed back this reactor to itself, and without doing anything, I've got these two lanes, and I've got these two lanes down here as well. And yeah, I could also, use these quantum tunnels to swap out into some of these middle lanes, etc., etc. There's a lot of options to be explored here. Similarly, with the sensor reactor, you can do this same kind of feedback path, where I've got two lanes here, and I can get access to two lanes over here, and I've got, instead of four swappers, I only have two. Another possible feedback path is I can do something like this, in which case I would need to essentially swap something down here and then swap it back up. So in this case, I effectively only have one lane down here. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting feedback paths that people have ended up doing to solve this puzzle. They're all very complicated and all very interesting. So let's get started. Britboy is up first with two reactors and 101 symbols. So this reactor here there's a lot of swapping and synchronized commands here. Ends up dropping nitrogens on these two spots and oxygens on those two spots. And if it's nitric oxide, you get a nitrogen there and oxygen there. All right. Now this reactor essentially collapses down these nitrogens and oxygens to build 2 sticks of 6. So one thing about this puzzle that I did was I edited the random molecule distribution so that instead of normally SpaceChem counts in buckets of 12, it now counts in buckets of 6 instead. So because of that, every 6 inputs will get you exactly 2 nitrogens, 2 oxygens, and 2 nitric oxides. So that's why it's batching up in sticks of 6 over here in this reactor. Yep. 101 symbols. Have another look at the first reactor. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, the lower nitrogen gets sorted by the number of bonds. Yeah, it doubles back on this bond minus, so if it's nitric oxide or the oxygen, it debonds the oxygen there instead of going elsewhere. Foxodecimal is up next. Also 2 reactors, but 95 symbols. So the metric here was reactor count plus 0.01 times symbols. So 100 symbols is about 1 reactor. So this reactor puts all the nitrogens into this spot and all the oxygens into this spot. So if it's 2 nitrogens, it'll get swapped and outputted there, and if it's 2 oxygens, it'll get swapped down here and outputted. And if it's nitric oxide, there's, yeah, it gets bond minus over here, and this gets moved over here. And this is also doing the count to 6 stick. You swap twice to break the bonds, and then drop, bond twice, and output. Yep. Up next, whoever 314. Now there's an interesting diversity in solutions. So instead of sorting the nitrogens and oxygens into one single output, this one is sorting them into 2 outputs instead. And this is actually a stick that's used to bond test. Yeah, I think it rotates through the inputs. I wonder why not move the start back 2 and then, yeah, that to prime this flip-flop. That would have saved a symbol. Yeah. Maybe it has to do with this pipe length. No, it doesn't really fill up. Yeah, so this, Uh, just do that. That would have saved the symbol. Yeah, remember you can input stall, and you can change the length of this pipe. That is a thing that you can do in non-production, or in production puzzles. That would have saved a symbol. Oh well. Yeah, and this second, let's take a look at the second reactor. So all this is doing is input beta, input alpha, swap this up over here. Yeah. And then you just bond and drop output. This is a very simple reactor. Yeah, so if you sort this into two outputs, the second reactor can be very, very simple. The only difficulty is you need to do bond sorting in this first reactor. Anyway, Astro Nelson is up next. So I've got a sensor reactor here that sorts nitrogen here and oxygen down here. That's all it does. Yeah, this is a very clever way of using a sensor. It essentially makes blue only activate if it senses this atom. So otherwise it stalls here until, yeah. This is very nice. Ah, and here we see this again. So count up to 6. And you just feed them in a pair at a time. And make the output. Yeah, one interesting thing that I'm slightly curious about is why not just put the output here and just, I don't know, do some kind of bond magic. Have like a square, debond everything, move them back. Probably takes more symbols, but oh well. $50 symbols, 2 reactors. Now we get to username void. Alright, so this is bond sorting. Let's see here. Oxygen into here, nitrogen into here. Yeah. Yeah. First bond tests the top. If the top doesn't bond, then you know it's N2. If it's nitrogen, it will... How does it test for nitric oxide? Ah, there's a double bond minus here that makes this oxygen get left behind here. So if this is a N2, this would swap into this output. Otherwise, the oxygen will get picked up and moved. It'll get swapped down here. Yeah. Okay, so now we know that we've got nitrogen up here and oxygen down here. It means our second reactor can be very, very simple. Yeah, it's just you input beta, input alpha, grab and bond. Yeah, so this is just more efficient bond sorting. Yellow Bunny with the first one reactor solution. And oh boy, this is complicated. Yeah. I believe this rotates atoms through until it finds both nitrogen and oxygen on these two sensors. But to be entirely honest, I don't know why there's so many flip-flops in this thing. So Yellow Bunny says yes, that's what it does. What is it doing? When does this input another alpha? Oh, okay. Okay, so then that's going to hit that. It's going to output. And that tells blue to move that up here. Oh, man. Yeah, this is very complicated. Yeah, the thing is, I'm trying to figure out when does it tell the Waldo to input another molecule. That's the part that I'm having a difficult time figuring out. I wonder if this feedback loop ever fills up. Oh, it does. Okay, okay. So it runs through this feedback loop some number of times to see if it can output. And because the bucket size is 6, you know that this won't fill up indefinitely if you just loop through it a certain number of times, I believe. I did run this for 4,000 inputs, and I never saw this feedback loop fill up past a few. Doesn't ever fill up past like a few atoms. Now I'm not entirely sure why it never fills up. It's kind of magic. There'll never be more than 2 atoms in the loop. Alright. Coming up next. Yeah, each bucket has 2 N2 and 2 O2. Yeah, and NO is sent out immediately, yes. So in that case, there shouldn't ever be more than 4 or 3 atoms in the loop, because the worst case scenario is if you have 2 N2 come at the very beginning, and then that will mean that because it only holds 1 atom inside the reactor, you've got 3 nitrogen atoms in the feedback loop. And then the next time you input, it has to be an oxygen. Yeah. Resumes is up next. Note that there is no feedback in this reactor. Oh boy. Yeah, so it turns out you can actually do something like this. Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend to know what's going on. It does magic, it makes outputs. Yeah, something about dissimilar things. I think it like senses to see if there's, yeah, if it's an NO, it gets moved over directly, and it will, uh, yeah. So it's doing some kind of, yeah, it's doing some kind of input counting where it stores two inputs on this left side, these four squares right here. This was, yes, this is something that I didn't intend to happen. That is why the input is placed the places they are. You can do this in 2 lanes, which is impressive. Yeah, this is... This is, rather difficult to comprehend just because of there's so much special casing here and there. Yeah, it's storing some stuff. It's swapping in a single lane so that it can make the nitric oxides and all that. This is very complicated. Yeah, if you try to use a square and you bond -3 times and you bond plus twice, you'll bond into a box with just one bond across all the boxes, and your oxygens will saturate. You can bond plus again, and if you have NO in a ring, then because your oxygens are bond limited already, nothing's going to happen. If you have NOON, then you'll have nitrogens have a bond, an extra bond. I'm not entirely sure if that would help. Tough Thought is up next with 1 reactor and 73 symbols. Yeah, so we've got the feedback again. And because this is a super bonder reactor, that means that we don't have sensors in this solution, so it's doing bond sorting in some way. Okay, so it can sort out nitrogen oxide by itself, or nitric oxide by itself, in which case it will output. And if it sees double nitrogen, it will drop an output, okay? Oxygens will stay in the reactor. So that's 6 inputs. And then what happens? And then it tells blue to start making nitric oxide. Okay. Hmm. So there's oxygens here. So this oxygen stick is going to be... Oh! Okay, so I think the initialization is that there's 2 oxygens on this oxygen stick. Because it'll never go past 6 length, because every 6 inputs, you'll only get 4 oxygen atoms added to the stick, which is then going to be used up with the 2 extra nitrogens. Let's see. Yeah, right there. And that, yeah, and then it keeps going. That's interesting. Yeah. So it takes advantage of the 6 bucket to put. It stores all the oxygens in here, dumps the it stores 4 oxygens from the 2 O2s in the reactor. It dumps the 4 nitrogens from the 2 N2s into this feedback path, and then it can then, once it counts up to 6 inputs, it creates 4 nitric oxides, while the nitric oxides that are from here get bypassed directly. That's very clever. One of the biggest issues that I thought of when thinking about a 1 reactor solution, especially with the super bonder reactor, is if you put like a bunch of waste into a feedback path, it gets rather difficult to tell when you need to input from your feedback loop and when to output, because if you're not careful, you can try to input too much from your feedback loop, and you'll end up stalling the reactor forever. So yeah, that's why I personally think the super bonder reactors are a little bit harder to use in a single reactor configuration than the sensors, because the sensors you can, it's much more friendly to doing conditional logic stuff. Vipumave is up next with a title Nice, because, well, it's 69 symbols. So this first, what does this do? Oxygens go up top, and so do nitrogens apparently. So it's just shoving everything into this one pipe here. And this gets into weird, freaky territory. So, warning, this solution takes a very long time to run. And another thing is, I've run this solution for 4,000 inputs, and it takes like 2 million cycles to finish 4,000 inputs or outputs. And what it does is kind of black magic to me. I really don't have a good idea of exactly what it's doing. I know that it's doing some kind of swap back and forth, and there's like a feedback path over here. Because this atom gets fed back into this pipe. and it's doing some kind of bond checking with stuff to get to nitric oxide. But again, to be entirely honest with you, I really don't know exactly what this reactor is doing. If VPUMAVE can send me a write-up later explaining exactly how this reactor works, yeah, I would be greatly appreciated. So, I did actually talk to VPUMAVE before this, asking how do you prove that this reactor doesn't ever crash, and they said essentially that the reactor and a feedback pipe have 8 atoms at all times, and at the end of each bucket, the nitrogen and oxygens are balanced, and there are 4 oxygens in the pipe, or yeah, like there's some crazy balancing going on in this. Um, and new molecules are fed into the pipe before the last recycle atom from the previous output. Yeah, like I'm reading this text that VPUMAVE sent me, and I'm just not grokking it. Mostly shuffling the atoms until random chance serves up the right combo, maybe 1 out of 8. Well, see, the problem is, if that were the case, then over a long enough time, there's going to be chances where it's not 1 out of 8. And then your feedback pipe is going to build up, and then it's going to clog and crash the reactor or stall it, right? So, but I've run this for quite some time, and for some reason, the number of atoms in the pipe is always stable. It'll never, it doesn't ever seem to clog up at the end of the day. Why? I'm not sure. Okay, let's see. So this is around the end of the bucket. Because red is waiting on this synchronize before it inputs another alpha. So what happens? So blue's running through this loop a whole bunch of times, which I'm guessing is doing something to shuttle these atoms back into the feedback pipe, and also somehow make the nitric oxide. Yeah, the part that I'm concerned about is that what if blue runs through a whole bunch of this and runs out of atoms in this pipe and hits this input beta and stalls. But the thing is, I think every time blue runs through this, it's always moving 1 atom up here so that it'll never stall like that. Yeah, so this is where blue is going to hit this sink and red is going to go on. So red is going to input an alpha here and swap some things over, and does some kind of magic and outputs one nitric oxide. And then blue does a whole bunch of crazy bond sorting. So every time red runs once, it inputs one alpha and it outputs one nitric oxide. I think I'm starting to understand this. I think it's every time red runs, it simultaneously inputs one new alpha and outputs exactly one product. And what blue is doing is that it's doing a whole bunch of shuffling around to ensure that it ends up being like a nitric oxide getting into this output zone every single time. Exactly how that happens, I am not entirely sure, but it just happens. Yeah, apologies. But yeah, this thing takes quite some time to run. As you can see, 24,000 cycles, which is much greater than I think everybody else up to this point. Yeah. Up next is Darius 1 at 66 symbols. A lot of flip-flop priming up there. And then, let's see what happens. Got a big stick. Oh, okay. I think I remember this. Yeah. So what this solution does is actually quite clever. It creates a 6-length stick in this lane, and then with all the others, it swaps that into this feedback pipe. So you know that the bottom here is going to be 4 oxygens and 2 nitrogens, whereas this feedback pipe has 4 nitrogens and 2 oxygens. And what it does is that it leaves one atom onto this sensor, and it will kind of loop over this beta input until it senses both a oxygen and a nitrogen, or a nitrogen and an oxygen, in which case it'll swap this back up to here, and then it'll make a nitric oxide, and then it'll repeat. Yeah, this is a pretty clever way of doing this puzzle. 66 symbols, and it's batched in 6, so it'll never crash. "4,000 cycles, much faster." Up next is Big Mango Head with another 1 reactor solution. And oh boy. Yeah, so I think this is pretty sure this is doing some kind of 6 input counting, but I'm not entirely sure. Nitrogen sensor to count to 6. Yeah, so there are some solutions I have seen. This is one that I have not seen because Big Mango Head did not have a valid solution until I think like today. So if there's pauses in the stream and me trying to figure out how a solution works, it's because they submitted really late. uh, yeah. Like, how does this not end up crashing? Because it won't hit this oxygen sensor. Oh, unless a nitrogen is up here. Uh, oh, because the bottom lane has a maximum of 4 oxygens at any one time. Yeah, it's doing something similar to the previous solution where it's taking advantage of this, like the number of oxygens and nitrogens are unequal, and you'll never get. How does this work? This part, this line only happens. Oh wait, this is a setup loop up here. Yeah, so this top part is a setup loop. Blue will run through it and they'll never hit it again. So there's a certain number of atoms in this feedback reactor all the time. And I think it's every time, yeah, every time it inputs another alpha, it outputs because it'll check and see that there's both nitrogen and oxygen. And until then, it will keep cycling through this feedback path to find nitrogen and oxygen until it works. I think that's what is going on in the solution. Yeah, it's pretty complicated. Yeah, if it gets to all 4 oxygens, that means that the feedback path is pretty much all nitrogen filled. Or rather, the next atoms in the bucket is all pretty much going to be nitrogen. This is constantly rotating through the input, so it'll never like build up extra waste, which is why it works forever. Yeah, clever solution. 54 symbols, but it can go lower. Binky is at 46. Oh lordy. This is an interesting array of of sense symbols. Pretty much just waiting for the right moment to sense that there's both nitrogen and oxygen when blue is shuttling nitrogen and oxygen back and forth. So my question is, why do 3 of these symbols have to exist? Like, why can't I just delete these 3 symbols entirely? Let me try deleting this and see what happens. uh... Binky, come on. When those symbols were in the middle of the path, yeah. Yeah. Well, Binky, if you'd like to, I will let you do that in your spare time. Yeah, SpaceChem hard. I don't blame you. Yeah, so blue does this initial setup of doing some stuff. And then all blue does is that it'll shuttle atoms back and forth. There's always like 4 or 5 atoms in this bottom loop, and whenever red outputs one, it will input another, and it'll swap an atom into this output loop. So it'll never, yeah, it's constantly rotating through all the inputs, so it never clogs this up. Yeah. Yeah. Alright, GG goals up next. Flipping at 40 symbols. Yeah, gonna be honest with you, when I first devised this puzzle, I thought that a single reactor solution would be probably somewhere around 60 to 70 symbols. And I was trying to figure out the metric for this puzzle. I was like, I shouldn't assume that that 60 symbols is going to be the lower bound, because it's very possible that some kind of miracle might happen and someone's going to get really low symbols. So yeah, theoretically, I could have done something like reactors -1 plus symbols times 0.01, but that really punishes people for not getting to 1 reactor, and I was not feeling like I was not feeling that mean. Yeah, so this reactor does something very similar, where you've got like a stick of 6 up here, and it's kind of rotating through all of the yeah, it's got this feedback path which has 4 or 5 atoms in it, and it's doing the same idea of rotating through all of these the atoms in this lower feedback path until it finds one that matches up with this with whatever atom is on this sensor right now, until both an oxygen and a nitrogen are present on a sensor, so that it will create a nitric oxide. And it's constantly rotating through the inputs, so it'll never clog up. Yeah, so same idea. Just 3 symbols less, or rather 6 symbols less. Oh, Binky. Yeah. But this is not the #1 solution. That goes to Andy with, surprisingly, a bond sorting approach, and because Andy submitted this towards the very end of the the time allotment, I don't really have any idea of how this reactor works. It is kind of magical. So a bunch of flip-flop priming, I think. I think. Yeah, and bunch of swaps and bond plus. Now, yeah, one interesting thing to note is that Andy does not have a feedback loop even, so all of this stuff is being done in one reactor. So, good job. I really don't know how this reactor works. I'm gonna skip forwards a bit because it goes through a lot of stuff before anything interesting happens. It makes a stick, okay. Then it needs to input another alpha, but that happens all the way up here, so I'm gonna wait until it counts. And then, finally, it will go and input another alpha. So now I've got 3 inputs, which means that this stick should get to 6 long. Yep, some swapping action going on. Okay, red has an atom now. Okay. Okay. It's got 2 nitrogens. And what does it do when it loops through this? Grab, bond plus, drop, swap, swap, drop. But nothing happens because the stick is not 6 length. So I think I have to wait for another input alpha before anything happens. Yeah. So let's fast forward until then. Alright, so now a new input alpha. Okay. So blue will grab if this stick gets too large. It almost kind of looks like it would crash into this if... I don't know. Okay, so it swaps twice, grabs, bond plus, drop, swaps again. Okay. Okay, so this loop will swap an atom down here. Red is going to grab it, and this is going to bond. Okay. Bond minus. Synchronize. What? How does it know that that is... How? Okay. Yeah, and then magic happens is about right. Okay, it runs through a whole bunch of dummy runs because nothing happens until the next input alpha. Because it doesn't have enough atoms. So this... I think the... Okay, so the first setup is that it first needs to input 3 atoms into this entire machine because it assumes it only works if there's yeah, sure, let's put a pause in here. That's a good idea. It needs to run through this at least 3 times to set up this these sticks. Now the next, okay, so this is NO. Okay, it does some magic swapping action that ends up putting an NO on these two, and that makes it output. Okay, so we have seen all that. The next time we've got an N, some magic swapping action happens. It's got NO on these last two. Oh, interesting. So the bond minus here detaches this if it's NO. And what does blue do then? It swaps it over so that a nitrogen is on here, and then magic happens. More magic happens. More magic happens. So I think okay, so one thing that I am pretty certain is happening is that every time that red bonds around here, it will always keep a nitrogen on this right side. So I think by running through this multiple times, Andy is guaranteeing that there's going to be a nitrogen on this side of this handle, of this cradle or whatever. And then I think it just keeps on looping through it more and more times until it can guarantee that it hits an oxygen, and then it will bond minus an output. Yeah, that is magic indeed. And what happens now? Yeah, so yeah, in that case, it just outputs until the next one. So in this case, there's already a nitrogen here, so I expect the nitrogen to be put on here and then outputted. Which, yes, so that's what happens. Okay. And here, I expect the same thing to happen. It just needs to cycle through all these extra... Oh, doesn't even need to cycle through all these extra nitrogens, but all this extra runtime is that happening. So now it's got an oxygen here, so I think the next input, it's going to first shift this oxygen into the storage and swap it out for a nitrogen to ensure that there's always a nitrogen in the second spot, and then it's going to loop until it finds an oxygen to stick onto this end, and then that's when it outputs. Let me see if that hypothesis is correct. So firstly, I expect... Yeah, so I expect this to be swapped out, constantly swapped out until it finds a nitrogen. Yeah. And then it keeps on swapping until it finds an oxygen. Yeah. If it's NN and another N gets swapped in, then because all Andy cares about is having another nitrogen over here, yeah, the original N will get swapped away, but the next atom is also going to be nitrogen anyway. So it essentially short circuits to find nitrogen, and then when it finds oxygen over here, it will bond it in such a way that it just outputs. Yeah, that is incredibly complex, and 36 symbols, and pretty much just as slow as Vipumaves. In fact, it's slightly slower. Yeah, bond sorting, recycle queue. Congratulations, Andy, for creating this enigma of a solution. Enigma of a solution that is at 36 symbols. This is up there with, like, I think there's, like, synthetic, I forgot what the puzzle was, but it was one of Guava Moment's early puzzles where you had to make like a calcium attached to like a californium or something, and Pseudo Dude made a solution that just did magic. Synthetic Illyrium, it might have been. Yeah, Pseudo Dude did like a bunch of magic with crazy timing stuff and managed to just get something. Um, Managed to get something far below. Like the symbol count was far below all the other competitors, and I think this is pretty much in the same vein. It's comparable for sure. Although the symbol savings aren't quite as drastic, like yes, it is 4 symbols fewer than GG Gull's solution here, but to be entirely honest, I am already incredibly impressed that it gets as low as 36 symbols one reactor. So yeah, congratulations, Andy, sincerely, for this crazy masterpiece. Alright, fun solutions. Vipu Mave. Cycles record? Maybe? What is this? This isn't even running at input speed, is it? I don't think this is running at input speed. Yeah, no, it's not. And all this is doing is huh. Okay, so this is disambiguating, and this is just, yeah. 478. I don't know if this would be the fastest possible because it's not running at input speed, but I'm not sure. So if anyone would like to beat this, please feel free to go ahead. Because theoretically, it should be able to get lower than... It should be around 400 cycles plus latency. But I don't know. This could be the cycles record. GG Gull has 3 reactors. So this is just collapsing down to this into a single stream output here. And this is sorting, yeah, so this is sorting nitrogen and oxygen. And then this is, yeah. So this is a very simple 3-reactor solution. 28 symbols, so this is a metric of 3.28, which is, yeah, it would get you last place, but because the first place solution was 1.36, you still get some points for that. Astro Nelson says they've got a 24 symbol. So this is a single Waldo 3.33. Is it really single Waldo? Is it really single Waldo? It's really 3 Waldos and 3 reactors, isn't it? It's more like 3 Waldos, right? But yeah, same idea. Collapse the input into a single atom stream, sort the atom stream into 2 outputs, and then you combine it again to get your output here. 1, 2, 3, 8. 33 symbols. Tough thought. The red wall is just traveling really quickly between the 3 reactors. Okay, what is this? Oh, lordy. Why are there so many flip-flops? I kind of almost don't want to sit through this. Okay, it gets more and more sparse. It's just waiting for what? What is it waiting for? I don't know. It's waiting for something. Well, it introduces more atoms somehow? Oh boy. Where even is the input alpha to this thing? Oh, it's over here. Okay, let's put a pause there. Okay. So, input alpha. K. Can check for nitrogen oxide. I don't know exactly what is going on with all of these swaps, and yeah, that. Okay. It's doing some kind of crazy amount of swaps and doing and outputting nitric oxide. This nitrogen never moves away from there. This is set up in blue. Yeah, it's magic that crashes eventually. There's this pause, it'll input, put it into this feedback loop. Oh, interesting. So every time it runs through this whole gamut, it creates a nitric oxide on these two bonders here, and it uses some kind of thing to move it over to this output. Now, how exactly this thing works, I still don't really understand, to be entirely honest. Yeah. Like, what happens if this inputs N2 here? Wouldn't it also bond? Right, but how does it check? Bond plus, bond plus, bond plus, bond minus, bond minus. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. So if you bond check this atom up here, it will either saturate to 2 bonds, or it will saturate to 0 bonds in the case of N2. Only in the NO case will this actually get up to 3 bonds, and then okay, so that's how it detects nitrogen oxide or nitric oxide. That's very clever. Yeah, and then there's some crazy feedback loop. Yeah. Which, to be entirely honest, I am not going to go and analyze exactly the rest of this with the atoms racing in this marble track, essentially. Yeah, that's a lot of that's a lot of analysis to do. Does the feedback loop actually do anything? I believe that if I increased the output count to 4,000, this output loop will eventually fill up and clog. So I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to duplicate this puzzle, edit the terrain, and change this output to 4,000 outputs. Save changes, erase solution. I'm going to export the current solution, move over here, import, and see what happens after a very long time. Yeah, you can see here it's building up waste in its pipe. It doesn't seem to be stable. I believe it. Tough Thought says that this crashes after like 1,700 outputs or something like that. Yeah, so what I'm guessing is happening is that it can handle most input configurations, but um, for some very specific cases, like if it gets like four oxygens in a row or four nitrogens in a row or something like that, it ends up building waste that it can't get rid of. And I think that's what's happening here. If we slow down and take a look, yeah, you can see here there's like long strings where you only have nitrogen, and followed by like long strings where you like only have oxygen. So I think that's what's happening to the solution and why it doesn't run for forever. Yeah, this does seem to get up to 4,000 cycles, but it won't run forever. Yeah, that's there are ways of creating chaos in SpaceChem because of really specific randomizer things, and well, that is one solution that does that. Andy has a one that says bond sort, oxygen queue, nitrogen stack, and this one does have feedback in it. Okay, so this is doing something. Okay, so yeah, so the oxygen is in this feedback path, and the nitrogen is being built up in a stick, and it's doing. How is it bond checking for the? That is my question. How does it check for nitric oxide? I'm not entirely sure. uh, Magic. Yeah, so this nitrogen stick is used to bond sort things. Um, nitrogen gets put into here. And then if it's oxygen, it gets left here. So there's a separate path that swaps oxygen out over here. So how does it ensure that there's always nitrogen here to bond with oxygen? What happens if this runs out of nitrogen? Does it ever run out of nitrogen? No, it never runs out of nitrogen because it builds up excess oxygen in this feedback path. Clever, clever, clever. Yeah, so there's always some nitrogen in this stick, so yeah, it can go down to 0 and it can build up, but it will balance out in the end. Binky. So, yes, it doesn't do any sensing, so you really need some kind of method to ensure that you always output one molecule every time you input another molecule. Now, the way that the way to do that is really difficult with just bond sensing, but people like Andy did manage to get that to work by essentially holding 6 atoms inside the reactor at all times so that they can ensure that they can find a matching pair, and then when that matching pair gets removed into the output, the whole thing kind of stops. So by looping through it enough times, in Andy's case, he's always able to ensure that every output he makes is correlated to one more additional input. So in his case, he'll never run into the problem of clogging up, or he'll never run into the problem of clogging up. But Tough Thought doesn't have that kind of mechanism of ensuring that he always has one output for every single input. It's because there's no guarantee that will happen. That's why, in his case, the thing doesn't run forever, because the input to output ratio is mismatched. Yeah, that's the main difficulty for making a one reactor bond sorting only solution. Yes, this is required to run forever. Yeah, that's the difficulty of making a one reactor solution to this puzzle if you're using the bond sorting method. It's because there's not an easy way to kind of do that kind of conditional of ensuring that you have one output for every input. Metric is reactors plus 0.01 times symbols. So yeah, do we have any other? Yes, we have one last fun submitting solution. Oh boy. Oh boy. This is an incredibly complicated solution. I am not going to be able to analyze this because my brain is about dead trying to analyze Andy's solutions, both his scoring and non-scoring solution, to be entirely honest. I wonder if Jojo is able to help me out here. Okay. So let's see what happens to this feedback. Okay, there's a giant feedback pipe. It doesn't seem like it manages to guarantee an output for every input. I think that's probably the recurring theme of not being able to guarantee one output for every input, and that's why this doesn't run for forever, and that's probably also why it's got this giant pipe here. Because it could end up stalling on a beta input if it completely runs out of atoms, but if it doesn't, then you can also have the other problem of putting too much stuff into your feedback pipe, in which case it'll end up clogging up after infinite time. So yeah, balancing the amount of stuff in the feedback pipe versus the number of inputs that you put in is crucial to make this thing run forever. Yeah, I'm gonna go and export this and check it in the 4000 output or input variant and run it for a very long time. Yeah, it's got the same issue of it's inputting more than it's inputting more stuff into this feedback pipe than it is than it is outputting, so it'll eventually clog up. Yes, so the gimmick of this puzzle is that you have quantum walls going horizontally across the entire reactor, so that you have to move atoms left and right, and you cannot move atoms up and down. And yeah, there are quantum tunnels in the reactors to aid in your quest. But yeah. Yeah, so this thing will crash eventually because this pipe will fill up and it'll never move. Alright, so that brings us to the end of the week 4 results. Congratulations, Andy, on a superb performance on both round 3 and round 4. Round 5 will be posted next week. So I've been busy for the past couple weeks with my internship, and yeah, it technically doesn't crash; it just stalls out. But it needs to run forever, right? If it doesn't run forever, it's not a valid solution. So round 5, I need to go and I need to make some kind of workaround to make it actually run. Yeah. I have something very special planned for round 5. It's just the, yeah, well, I'm having some technical problems getting it to work, so please bear with me. Yeah, it's something pretty special. Oh yes, also team forming is open. What the spoiler of what the metric will be. Yes, you can have a spoiler on the metric. The metric of round 5 is going to be cycles. And there's probably going to be some tie breaks, but it's going to be primarily cycles. Yeah, so that is the spoiler. I'll also post that to the Zachtronics chat. So, spoiler for R5. Metric is going to be primarily cycles. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting and exciting and flavorful. It's gonna be very flavorful. That's why I'm excited for round 5. It's gonna be a very, very flavorful puzzle. I will not say its name because that might spoil it. But yes, please go and form teams. You have a week to form teams to be valid for round 5. If you form teams after round 5 is announced, I believe that means that you will be a team for round 6, but not round 5. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I'm pretty sure. So yeah. Go out and mingle with your fellow SpaceChem engineers, your reaction engineers, and we'll see you in... Next stream is going to be in like 3 weeks, because we're going to have a 1-week intermission, and then it's going to be another 2 weeks for people to work on round 5. And round 5 is worth 6 points, so 50% more points than all of the previous puzzles, with the exception of week 1, which was 3 points. So yeah. Again, thanks all for coming, and we'll see you in 3 weeks.